Good morning. Let's get straight to markets.
Take a look at the impact for the indices.
Factual. Succinct. All you need to know before your trading day starts. Subscribe to our newsletter, CNBC's Daily Open.
Welcome to Beyond the Valley, a CNBC tech podcast with Arjun Kharpal and Tom Chitty.
Beyond the Valley.
What will the world look like in 2140? Will we live in fully automated cities? Will AI robots exist among us? Will the human race still live on planet Earth? Much of our long-term future is unknown, except, we are told, when it comes to Bitcoin. 2140 is the year when all 21 million Bitcoin in existence should be mined. It's a long way off, but how the Bitcoin ecosystem evolves over the coming years may determine what happens to the cryptocurrency when its limited supply is reached.
Beyond the Valley.
I think by 2140, I'd love if there was a tool that just sorted my emails out.
Right.
You know what? Whatever else happens with Bitcoin, flying cars, or whatever else, I'll be happy with that. I probably won't be here, but hopefully my lineage may enjoy.
So for 2140, that's kind of what you're...
That's the goal. I feel like we've been promised so much over the years with movies and stuff that hasn't happened. I don't really want to set the bar too high for our future generation to be disappointed. And if there's a tool that just really is really smart and does all your emails for you, like everything, replies to them in the way you would speak with all of that, we might be close with some of these AI tools.
Well, there's a few announcements this week from Google and OpenAI and such, and a lot of people have been referencing Her. Have you seen Her?
Yeah.
And they're saying, oh, we're there already. Obviously, the clips that came out are controlled within, those. It hasn't been experimented by just, your regular consumers yet. So,
but imagine you trusted some of these tools now, and you woke up the next morning and checked, what emails had been sent on your behalf and this sort of AI had just, abused someone on the other end or sent some sort of...
Well, it'd be very human, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. Some of the sort of passag comments that people put in emails.
And it's been learned
as I previously mentioned, as stated in my previous email, those kind of things. Then it'd be super accurate, actually, yeah.
If you could not do that next time.
There we go. So we have high hopes for the future.
Absolutely. It's all positive and, rainbows and sunshine. Just quickly, bit of housekeeping. If you'd like to keep up to date on the world of tech, then the best place to start is the Beyond the Valley weekly newsletter, packed with the best international tech stories from CNBC. You can subscribe by heading to cnbc.com/Beyond the Valley. Click on the subscribe button and it will drop in your inbox every Friday. Before we get back to our main story, we've got to hear Arjun's stat of the week, which is...
So, Tom, for this week, the stat of the week is $29.5 million.
$29.5 million. Okay. In a first for Beyond the Valley, we have based this podcast off the back of an email that we received a few weeks ago, which is also a reason why you should email us in. Obviously, we can't promise that we, of course, will base a whole episode around your email, but we will read them out. The email address is beyondthevalley@cnbc.com. Talk about audience engagement. Hey, Arjun. The email in question is from Adam Peevler. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Following our episode about the Bitcoin halving that we did a few weeks ago. He's from Indiana in the States. He writes, in your article, the halving is explained well. There you go, Arjun.
That's good news.
Pat on the back.
Yeah, thank you.
You write that halving makes, we spoke, that halving makes it less profitable to mine and Bitcoin supply goes down and demand increases. What I don't understand is, will having less miners impact or affect the transaction speed? In other words, when mining is eventually finished, how will the blockchain be completed for future transactions? Or do miners have any impact on solving the blockchain puzzle for new transactions? Clearly, nobody is going to solve blockchain puzzles for free. Simply stated, how will the Bitcoin blockchain function after mining? If is no longer profitable for anyone or after all coins have been mined? Feel free to respond with a follow-up article, and feel free to use my thoughts as your article prompted my pondering on this. Just for clarity, I said that we spoke about it, but we also had a transcript from the podcast, so that's what Adam may be referring to. So off the back of that, we decided to make a whole podcast, which is great. Arjun, first things first, why 21 million Bitcoin?
So the concept of 21 million was proposed by Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious inventor of Bitcoin. Now, nobody knows who this person or group of people are. There have been a number of claims from people in the public claiming they are Satoshi Nakamoto. None yet are to be believed. But Satoshi, whether it's a person or group of people, released a white paper about Bitcoin in 2008. Bitcoin was invented in 2009. And in that, there was the proposal of 21 million Bitcoin. And I'm not sure exactly on why 21 million, but the idea of a finite supply is what's important here. So the idea that unlike traditional fiat currency like the US dollar, which can be printed more of, there's a finite supply of Bitcoin, and this will cap any kind of inflation in the cryptocurrency and create this scarcity, which so many proponents of Bitcoin are excited about. So that was sort of, I think, the thinking behind the 21 million.
Okay, right. So the 21, they just plucked that number from somewhere.
It's a nice 21, lucky number, is it?
Is it?
I don't know. Blackjack.
Oh, yeah. That must start to make sense. I never made that connection. For our listeners that are new to Bitcoin or blockchain, which is the technology that Bitcoin relies on, how does that work?
So Bitcoin is what's often referred to as a digital currency or a cryptocurrency. And there's something called the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, you can think of this as the technology that underpins Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin is the actual currency or the coin, or and we'll debate later whether it is a currency, but the underlying rails of that is the blockchain. Now, the blockchain is effectively a public ledger of activity and transactions with Bitcoin. You and I could look through Bitcoin's transaction history dating back to the start on the public blockchain. We could do that right now. Now, Bitcoin is not issued by a single entity or like a central bank, which traditional currencies are. Instead, it's often called a distributed or decentralized currency. The reason is that it's because the blockchain that underlies it is maintained by a network of computers or miners, effectively. And the blockchain is made up of blocks, and these blocks are sets of transaction, and that's where the miners come in.
So there's humans behind the miners. They're operating computers, but there's human interaction there that is setting up the computers, which then mine the Bitcoin.
That's right, and they run these very large mining operations. Companies has been set up to do this.
Huge swathes of computers using up a lot of energy, I imagine, to mine these Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
So how does the mining work?
So mining is a process to verify transactions and generate new coins. So in the early days of Bitcoin, you and I could use our home computer to effectively verify transactions if we ran a specific software. But now the computing power required to do so is so great and vast that it's usually these huge specialized firms. They're not people in a room. These are huge farms of data centers running these softwares to mine Bitcoin. Now, miners run specialized hardware and software to verify, as I mentioned, these transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, let's say I sent you some Bitcoin and on the blockchain, and someone else sent someone, and there's 10 different transactions floating around. I mentioned previously about the blocks. These transactions are basically grouped into a block. And what happens is there's these specialized computers, software, competing against each other to solve a cryptographical puzzle attached to that block. And by solving that, you verify those transactions, and those transactions go through. And the winner, whoever solves that cryptographic puzzle first, is incentivized to do so, because by solving that, verifying those transactions, those miners are rewarded in Bitcoin. That block attaches onto another block, hence a chain of blocks, the blockchain, hence the verifiable ledger of activity of transactions. And as I mentioned, the winner of that, those miners who win out and solve those puzzles, are rewarded in Bitcoin. Now, these puzzles get harder and harder over the years. So they require more computing power and more energy intensity to do. Now, the price of Bitcoin, of course, has to be high enough to justify the cost involved and for these miners to be profitable in mining. Currently, miners get rewarded with 3.125 Bitcoin per block mined. And so, but that was higher before, of course. And
every 4 years, those rewards are halved, which is what the email that I read out at the start was based off of an episode we're talking about with Bitcoin halving. But let's explain why and how that halving takes place.
So exactly that. I mean, halving happens every 4 years, and it's written in Bitcoin's code. And so I mentioned there, if you're a miner and you solve these blocks, you get rewarded in Bitcoin. But every 4 years, that reward slashes in half. So you imagine you're a miner. Every 4 years, your revenue effectively could be cut in half per block.
But to counter that, the idea in theory is that the value of Bitcoin would go up. So you might be getting less Bitcoin for doing the same or even harder work. But the value of that smaller percentage of Bitcoin is actually increased. So it's deemed still worth it.
Spot on. That's exactly it. And that's when we talk about miner profitability, that's exactly the point. Is the price of Bitcoin high enough to justify mining? And also, you got to think about does the cost of energy change? Does your energy mix change? Is it more renewable? Does that bring down the cost? Are your computers more efficient? Are you running things in a more efficient way to bring down the overall cost of your mining operations? And of course, hopefully, what miners are hoping for is that the price of Bitcoin continues to rise each halving, as you mentioned, even though they may be getting less Bitcoin, the value of that Bitcoin is a lot higher as well. Now, the idea of halving effectively is that to keep a lid on inflation, to not flood the market with new coins. And as we've discussed in previous episodes, halving often has preceded Bitcoin's price to new all-time highs. And we've seen that.
Ambition to me is about doing better.
I think ambition creates a pathway.
The best advice I can give to someone starting off a career is don't have a career, have lots of careers, try loads of different things.
Talk to people and put your ambition out there.
I don't feel that I've hit peak ambition because it's a learning journey.
CNBC is where ambition meets opportunity. What does living ambitiously mean to you? Hear it from our CNBC anchors, reporters, and global business leaders on CNBC.com.
When we go back to the cryptographic puzzle that the miners have to solve, that's also to sort of put a barrier on just anyone solving these or mining Bitcoin. Again, it's that scarcity. It doesn't want to just release loads of Bitcoin out into the world because that will see the value drop. And
just to that point, I mean, just exactly. And I think also it's important. I mentioned that word sort of decentralized. A core principle of Bitcoin is that it's decentralized. It's not owned or mined or issued by a single entity. Now, if you got to a point where it was really easy to do this and the barrier to entry was really low, you'd get a lot of people kind of doing it, as was the start. But now it's become a little bit more professionalized, the mining industry, but it's still not controlled by a single entity, which is still an important part of it. I think one of the big questions is, as it continues to get harder, does the concentration of miners go down? Is there consolidation? And then do we get into a world where actually there are way fewer miners and fewer miners upholding the Bitcoin network, actually in contrast to what Satoshi Nakamoto wanted.
Or they have a greater control or at least influence over where the Bitcoin price goes. I mean, you mentioned just a little earlier that obviously if the price of Bitcoin goes down so much, then the incentives to mine are much less. Could we ever be in a situation where the value is so low that just no more Bitcoin, it's just not worth it?
It can. I mean, and we've seen over the years a number of mining operations collapse because they can't sustain the cost equation of it all.
But I suppose to counter that, the scarcity would still be there, so the value would hold, or some element of value would still hold because it's still in short supply. Okay, let's move the conversation on to 2140, as I read about at the top, is when all Bitcoin should be mined. What happens then? The miners get rewards for mining, but if it's all been mined, then how does the Bitcoin ecosystem operate without these people sort of looking after it?
So this is exactly what Adam, our listener who wrote in, was asking, right? What happens when all the Bitcoin are mined? And from the mining perspective, the generally sort of accepted line of thinking is that we move from a world where it's the mining, the rewards, that is making money, to a world in which the miners are making money off transaction fees. So it's a different model.
Right.
Kind of like a payments company makes money off transaction fees, like a PayPal, for example. That's exactly what they're thinking the miners become. Now, I wanted to dig into this a little bit more and find out what the industry's thinking about it. So I managed to catch up with Josh DeVos. He is the research lead at CC Data. And I asked him a little bit about what happens to the miners when all those Bitcoin are mined.
So currently, the significant majority of miner revenue comes from this block reward element. So based on some calculations that we've done, since September 2023, there have only been about 26 days out of 260 where the daily block rewards accounted for less than 80% of that total daily mining revenue. So what that means is that there is this significant dependence on the mining revenue as a result of block generation at the moment, rather than transaction fees. So when we hold price constant and block rewards continue to reduce, what this means is that there will be a higher dependence placed upon the revenue generated as a result of transaction fees. So this requires higher demand for the Bitcoin blockchain. This is because fees ultimately flex depending on transaction processing and how much demand there is.
So one of the interesting things here, I think, is what Josh was saying, is that it all depends really on this thinking that, okay, we're going to move to a world where Bitcoin has become quite large scale and actually the demand is high enough for its use that these miners can sustain themselves on transaction fees because it's being transacted with, it's being used in various ways. And so the thought is that the miners will survive if the demand is there. Now, like I said, we won't be there in 2140, but
well, you never know.
Bitcoin could be obsolete.
Well,
I'm not saying it will be. I'm just saying that's one strand of thinking.
Absolutely. And also, a lot of people say that Bitcoin essentially, and I wanted to ask you this, could it just be turned off? Like, could someone turn off the blockchain technology?
I don't think anyone could turn it off. I think Bitcoin will fizzle out if the demand isn't there, right? Like, let's just say...
But no one has, there's not this Satoshi, for instance, just hovering over a button that could just go, right, I'm just done with that.
Yeah, I'm
going to go and do something else.
I don't think so.
No, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't think it could just be turned off. And remember, there's all these Bitcoin now in existence.
Because it's decentralized, essentially.
Because it's
out there. It's now, it's amongst us.
It's amongst us, and that's kind of one of the what proponents love about it, is that thing. And we've seen obviously other cryptocurrencies fail when the projects that they're involved with collapse, or they're just no value to them. They're a scam, or even, we've seen various instances of that. But at this point in time, Bitcoin is the largest cryptocurrency around. We've seen ETFs, exchange traded funds, as we've spoken about before. It's being more and more adopted. And so there is at this point, a legitimate interest, at least, in it. And we are seeing growth in it. And so it's on a trajectory. But again, we're talking, more than 100 years into the future. So, because what if something better comes along than Bitcoin? What if something almost equivalent but better comes along? What if the world, there are so many what ifs.
Central banks decide to issue their own digital, coins, currencies, which are also decentralized in a way which compares with Bitcoin, but they have, I don't know.
The backing of governments.
Yeah.
Like that's there's so many what ifs, which is, what I think is wonderful about this conversation as well, is that you can throw so many what ifs in there. But I think it's so interesting to think about, I don't think we think about it often enough, is what if, what happens when all the Bitcoin...
Yeah, also, could it be that thing where, could you be passing it on to your children, generations to come? It's seen as an asset like a house perhaps, or, just fiat currency, in the will, you have 2 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
And there's a fight within the family over who gets
the login
Bitcoin.
Details for your Bitcoin exchange and wallet are in there.
And they saw it on a post-it note, and someone's stolen the current. Oh, I could see future court cases where children are fighting over the Bitcoin and who got the login details.
Who got the login details? Yeah, it's the sort of the equivalent of someone having a bunch of gold in a vault. Could be.
Yeah.
Could
who
be.
had the code to the vault?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to talk a little bit about the evolution then of the blockchain as a platform for Bitcoin as a currency. It's in place, but is it enough in terms of the miners getting a transaction fee? Is it enough to sustain the blockchain, or could we see the blockchain sort of develop into something more?
One of the things Josh said to me as part of our conversation was it was a really interesting comment. He said, the narrative around Bitcoin is malleable, right? So, Satoshi Nakamoto in that white paper spoke about it as this sort of peer-to-peer payments network. Now, Bitcoin as a payments network hasn't really materialized, as such. It's not, we're not going into shops and paying with Bitcoin. Now, we've seen experiments.
Largely, it's...
Yeah, El Salvador, which made Bitcoin a legal tender out there a little while ago. They've been trying it, but it hasn't really become a widespread payment. Now, there's others who liken it to a version of digital gold. Now, gold, as we know, is seen as this sort of safe haven asset that you hold in times of turbulence or in times of market fluctuations and volatility. So others see it in that. Again, that's a narrative with a lot of question marks.
And again, you pay with gold.
You don't pay with gold. So that goes counter to that. So you've got the people who say it will be a viable currency. You've got the people who say this is a safe haven, asset, which again, both have huge question marks over. Then there's a new strand of thinking about what happens to Bitcoin. So there's been an interesting development due to some upgrades on Bitcoin's network. And you may have heard the term NFT, non-fungible token. So these were popularized a little while ago because they were these sort of pieces of digital art that were being sold for astronomical sums of money. And then that entire market collapsed. And often these NFTs were built on another blockchain called Ethereum. Now, you can think of the Ethereum blockchain as I like to liken it to an operating system, like a Google Android or an iOS that you can build things on top of. That's kind of what Ethereum was. So it was another blockchain.
Which also had a cryptocurrency.
Which has Ether attached to it. And people were building these NFTs on Ethereum. Now, for a long time, people didn't see Bitcoin as a blockchain where you could build stuff on. But more recently, due to some upgrades, something new has happened, and that is something called ordinals. Now, these are effectively digital assets which are inscribed on a Satoshi which is the lowest denomination.
Stick with us, listener.
Stick with us here. The lowest denomination of a Bitcoin. So you know how you have like a cent in the US or a penny here?
Yeah.
You have a Satoshi, which is one Satoshi. Well, 100 million Satoshis are in one Bitcoin.
Okay.
100 million Satoshis in a Bitcoin. So there's ordinals are a digital asset inscribed on one Satoshi. So the point I'm making here is that people are finding a way to build other digital assets on top of Bitcoin's blockchain now.
Okay.
Now, if, for example, more things are built on Bitcoin's blockchain, that could increase demand for Bitcoin as people buy and sell these things and various other assets on Bitcoin's blockchain.
And it could preserve the life of the blockchain because it's being used by others who are then keeping it going, basically.
And reinventing it. And so when we talk about what happens when all the Bitcoin are mined, imagine a world now in which, yes, Bitcoin's being transacted with. Yes, people are buying it for, I don't know, safe haven purposes. But what also if they're transacting on it for other things, NFTs, and various other assets that are built on Bitcoin's blockchain, then miners are going, well, this is great. Demand's there. We can make transaction fees of all these different transactions happening. So that, I think, is the almost utopia for many in the Bitcoin world in 2140, that this is the kind of picture that's painted with Bitcoin, where it's being used as a currency, it's being used as a safe haven, it's being traded, it's also being built upon, and there's a bunch of assets on it that people are buying and selling.
Just quickly, the ordinals, is that going to be another form of like digital asset? Because when we talk, you referred to the NFTs, which were digital art, right? And you could see it, you know, you couldn't necessarily hold it, but you could see kind of what it was. But these ordinals, what
effectively, yeah, another form of digital asset. We'll see how they develop.
But like as a currency,
just as almost as a collectible at the moment.
Right. So I have a ordinal.
Yeah, people.
Can I see the ordinal?
You can see it. You have it. You know.
Okay. But like, it's not going to be art.
It can be.
Right.
It can be art. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I think it's basically like an NFT, but on Bitcoin's blockchain rather than Ethereum.
I imagine there's a lot of people who listen to this who aren't like, you know, au fait with this world, who are going, it's just like saying, right, here's a PDF that I've just, you know, and there you go. That's it. Because it's on the blockchain, I'm just going to say it's got value, and you know, my friend over here is going to also say it's got some value because he's, and you know, and then suddenly you just create something out of nothing. I suppose that's how anything gets value. I mean, you know, someone said, "Oh, gold, it's shiny. It must have some value." Do you know what I mean? At one point in time.
No, exactly. But that's a great point. But where, again, fans of these NFTs are excited about is the fact that you can prove the ownership of an asset. Mm-hmm. You can prove because of the public traceability of the blockchain. You can prove that you own that NFT. Now, if I just broaden it a bit to slightly more, another example which people are excited about. Let's take artwork, real life artwork. And if I was a really very expert thief and I've stolen some artwork from a mansion out in some very
Bordeaux.
Exotic place, yeah. And I've also stolen a bottle of wine while I was at it. Very expensive old bottle of wine, just for fun. And then, you know, I've left no trace. But I've then gone and I've shaved my beard off, so my disguise is gone. I've taken my hat off, and my those burglar goggles they wear, and I've now got this artwork, and I go to an auction and I sell it. And people are like, wow, this is really good art. How does, now there's a chance that the person who got robbed has reported it. But there's also a chance that, years pass, whatever, and this artwork resurfaces. We don't know if it's real. We don't know authenticity. We don't know who owns it. That's the current world in which we live. We don't know the authenticity of certain artwork, etc. But the idea is that if you're putting some of these assets on a blockchain, the authenticity, the ownership can be proved with these sort of digital keys, effectively. That's one of the hopes, I think, and theories. We've heard about property, like physical assets being digitally tagged effectively and put on the blockchain in a public ledger to prove authenticity and ownership. So I'm taking it beyond sort of the digital to some of the theories, some of the ideas.
Yeah, the idea behind it, that it could be a form of security for people to, hold and be able to prove. And we've talked about developing countries who may not have the document, the processes in place for documenting, ownership of property or land, and this could, step in and solve a lot of those problems.
This is it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit finally about the price. Because what does it all mean when we get to 21 million Bitcoin? It will, in theory, increase the scarcity?
In theory, that scarcity is key here. I think if the scarcity narrative is to be believed, which many people who are bullish on Bitcoin do believe, that because there is a finite amount, this stuff becomes rarer. And if you got one, the value will increase. And I think people point to, we've spoken before about Bitcoin works in these cycles where, there's an all-time high, it rides a wave, crashes significantly.
Maybe not all the way to where it crashed previously.
Previously, exactly.
Yeah.
Sort of a higher low.
Yeah.
Bobbles around for a bit, and then halving happens in a new cycle, right? So scarcity combined with the cycle effect. And then the third part of the puzzle is there is hope demand increases, as we've discussed through different ways of using Bitcoin, that all of this will lead to a price increase. Again, question I asked to Josh DeVos at CC Data. Here were his thoughts.
Historically speaking, we've seen Bitcoin's price being appreciated and returning positively. In 2 out of the 3 previous halvings, we've seen by the 90-day mark returns above 50%. So in terms of what the halving does or the influence it has over price performance, it tends to catalyze the cyclical expansion of Bitcoin's price. And what we've seen in the previous 3 cycles is that each cycle, if we take the time zero as the Bitcoin halving, each halving cycle takes between about 360 days to 550 days in terms of the time it takes from the point at which the Bitcoin halving occurs and the point at which the Bitcoin price tops within that cycle. So there has been this extension of maturity. This might be as a result of increased institutionalization. It might be due to the lowered volatility over time between each cycle. And so, it's important to consider that these cycles can, in theory, continue to extend. They might not always reflect previous cycles, but generally speaking, based on history, what we have seen is expansion of price and the catalyzation of a halving kicking off a bull run. Whether it might take 50 days or 100 days, it does tend to precede that expansion.
So again, very hard to predict the specific price, but he was alluding to, if we look at past cycles and all these different trends, that in theory, the price should be higher. Again, we've discussed this, but what if something better than Bitcoin comes along? What if something new happens? There's so many what ifs, and I think that is ultimately the big question mark about the future of Bitcoin.
Oh, what a way to wrap it up. Well done. Well done, you. I think that was a fantastic episode. Really sort of delves deep into Bitcoin and the infrastructure behind it.
I'm glad Adam sent that email.
Yeah, thank you to Adam. That's very good of him. To
keep those emails coming, because they do spark a lot of debate when we read them and chat, so it's quite nice.
Absolutely. Right, so all we have to do before we finish is Stat of the Week, which I'll just tell our listener that you were saying was a fantastic Stat of the Week.
I think it's really good.
Okay, let's hear
$29.5 million.
Right, so we've been talking about Bitcoin, we've been talking about 2140, 21 million Bitcoin. So wait,
29.5 million.
If current trajectories are to continue, it will be the price of Bitcoin in 2140.
Wow, that'd be wild. Imagine that, one Bitcoin, 29 million. I mean, it's not implausible, I guess. Some of the theory. But it's unfortunately it's nothing to do with that. What it is as of today when we're recording this, it's actually the total mining revenue per day.
Wow.
According to blockchain.com.
Wow.
Data. So that's how much currently miners are making per day. Now, of course, you can imagine this figure fluctuates wildly when there are days where there's huge demand to, purchase Bitcoin, or there's huge transaction fees. That demand will fluctuate. But, just gives you a kind of snapshot, I guess, of
why they're in the business.
Why they're
mining.
in the business of mining, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well done, Arjun. Smashed it, as always.
Was it a good start of the week?
It was a good start of the week. Okay. I didn't think my answer was that bad either.
No, I liked your answer, because I have heard some sort of wild theories about how much Bitcoin will be.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we go, next week we are going to be at VivaTech in Paris, and we're going to do a live recording of Beyond the Valley. We'll be recording the episode, the podcast, on Thursday afternoon at our TV stand, which is in Hall 1, I believe. I imagine that the rest of the media will be around there, so you won't be able to miss us. Please come along and listen live if you'd like. We may even get you to ask a few questions from the sidelines.
And if you don't want to email, you could sort of hand deliver a letter.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Even better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very analog. But yeah, so that will be us next week. We hope to get that episode out before the end of the week. So yeah, very exciting. That is it for this episode. Before we go, please follow and subscribe to the show and rate us if you'd like. Thank you, Arjun.
Thank you, Tom.
We'll be back next week for another episode of Beyond the Valley. Goodbye.
Beyond the Valley.